Okay, I've got something really fascinating to share with you today. It's a sample paper from something called the Nationwide Biotechnology Olympiad, but here's the kicker. It's not for high schoolers, it's not even for middle schoolers. This is for first graders.
So that's the big question, right? What on earth does biotechnology even mean for a 6-year-old? What are they expected to know? Well, let's find out by digging into the actual questions on this test. To get our heads around this, let's start where the test starts. We're going to look at some pretty familiar questions about the world around us. Just to get a baseline of what first grade science looks like.
All right, so first up, we've got some pretty simple questions. This is exactly what you'd expect to see, right? A classic animal sound question. Super straightforward. And it keeps going like that. What sound does a sheep make? So far, this is all about observing the world you can see and hear. Totally normal stuff.
The test also touches on some basic plant biology, like what they need to grow. The answer, of course, is sunlight and water. Again, this feels like it's pulled right out of a standard first grade science book.
Exactly. Animal sounds, what plants need to live. This is the bedrock of elementary biology. But, and this is the important part, this is a biotechnology Olympiad. So where does that piece come into play? Well, let's move on to the next section, because this is where things really start to get interesting. The test begins to shift from the world we can see and touch to the world we can't.
And boom, there it is. The test gives a straight-up definition of microbes. It's introducing this idea of an entire world of living things that are completely invisible to us. I mean, that is a massive conceptual leap for a first grader.
And what's really interesting is how they follow that up. They don't just leave it as an abstract idea. They introduce the tool you use to actually see this invisible world. So now, we're not just talking about microbes, we're talking about microscopes, too. And it's not just about tiny creatures either. Check this out. The test asks students to identify photosynthesis. That is a pretty advanced word and a complex process for this age group. So, okay, we've seen some basic biology and we've seen some surprisingly advanced concepts. But the name on the paper is the BioTechnology Olympiad. So where does the technology part finally show up? This question is the key. It asks directly, what is made using biotechnology? And the answer it's looking for is curd. This is our first real clue as to how this test is defining that big word for a 6-year-old. And when you look at the questions, a really simple formula starts to appear. You take a biological process, that's the bio part, and you show how it's applied for human use, that's the technology. It's a very practical, hands-on definition. So the whole picture starts to become clear through the test's own examples. For a first grader, biotechnology isn't some complex thing about gene splicing. It's these really fundamental applications, using bacteria to make food, using animal waste for fuel, modifying plants, or even using animal skins to make materials like leather. And this comparison just illustrates that distinction perfectly. On one side, you have a question about a purely natural process, plants making food from the sun. On the other, you have a process guided by people, creating seedless grapes. That's the line they're drawing between biology and biotechnology. But just when you think you've got it all figured out, this sample paper throws a complete curveball. It brings up a concept that is just surprisingly advanced even for a test like this. That's right, DNA. The test asks which living things have DNA, and the answer is all of them. So these first graders are being introduced to the universal building block of all life. That is a truly massive idea. So let's just zoom out for a minute and think about what this all means. Why frame basic biology in this specific way? What's the point of calling this a biotechnology Olympiad? Well, the philosophy behind it seems pretty clear. It's about taking these concepts that kids are already learning, about plants and animals, and just framing them in a new way. It's about building a foundation for more complex scientific thinking down the road. And that's really the big takeaway here. The goal isn't just to have kids memorize what sound a cat makes. It's to plant a seed. It's to help these young learners start connecting the dots between the natural world and the human world, between the bio and the technology. Ultimately, a test like this leaves us with a really provocative question. By putting ideas like microbes, photosynthesis, and even DNA in front of 6-year-olds, it really challenges our assumptions about what kids are capable of learning. And it makes you wonder, how early is too early to start talking about life's biggest and most fundamental ideas?